Hello and welcome to Impera Project, a project built on a dream. On the 23rd of July 2023, the Spanish general elections took place. It was a fight between the quickly gaining popularity of the right wing led by Partido Popular and the far-right party Vox, and the so far dominant left-wing parties united under the leadership of Pedro Sanchez and his Partido Socialista Obrero Español. It was a fight that would further shape the political environment of Spain, but also of Europe. Who won? Well, nobody, as it seems the far right obtained a combined total of 169 seats, 7 short of majority, while the left wing got 153 seats, still not a majority. From what we know, the politics of Spain were always complicated, especially after the fall of the fascist dictator Francisco Franco in 1975. Why did we decide to discuss this topic in particular? Taking into account the so-called El Pacto del Silencio that the Spanish have all agreed on, seeing this country flirting so much with the right wing after years of supporting the left is worrying at best, distressing at worst. We had a pretty tense discussion with a fellow comrade recently in a pub. We were discussing the descent of the right wing once again on the lands of Europe. As of today, there are quite a couple of countries in Europe where the right wing becomes increasingly stronger by the day. We are of course talking about Hungary and its fall into absolutism, of Poland, which through their conservative laws have increased their grip on the population, and of Italy and their newfound nostalgia after the old days of Mussolini. There is also the case of Austria and Greece, where parties such as the Austrian People's Party joined hands with Freedom Party of Austria, and respectively in Greece, where the group called Golden Dawn had obtained representation in the parliament prior to their leaders being arrested in 2020. Our comrade told us that we worry too much, that this romance of Europe with the far right is just a fling and it will pass just as fast as it came. We are not so sure about it, taking into consideration what happened last time. Today we want to talk about the implications and the possible outcomes and consequences of the far right rising in Europe. But before we start this video, we would appreciate it if you'd press the subscribe button, turn on the notifications, leave a like and a share if you enjoy our content. Thank you very much for your time. There is a fear, a palpable fear of far-right politicians reaching a majority in the European Parliament. From the moment in which this target is achieved, they will, at least in theory, face weaker opposition in pushing their agenda over the countries of the European Union. But are they truly dangerous or just an image of the overall civil unrest? At the end of World War II, it seemed that Europe learned, finally, that extremism, especially far-right, has the potency of a nuclear bomb. Literally. The sole purpose of this union was to further avoid the new descent into total war, to put an end once and for all to revanchism and xenophobic rhetoric. Yet it seems that the Union is failing its people now more than ever, and the rise of the far right is by no means a mishap of the collective mind. It is a direct result of years of aberrant policies, which have enriched the few over the expense of the many. These neo-fascist parties are above anything populist in their nature. Chronic capitalism and weak-minded democracy, devoid of ethics and principles, had led to a terrible living condition of the working class. Incompetent politicians in the favorable cases, imbecile in the worst, have thrown Europe once again into the hands of dangerous speeches and fanatic ideas. When the majority of the politicians have their morals situated in the pockets of corporations and greedy lobbyists, it is only natural that the people who have suffered so much would flock to the first entity that promised them the exact opposite. But you might say, if this is indeed the case, then why are people going straight to the fascists and not to the socialists or communists, whose very existence is an affront to the already established status quo? There are many reasons. For example, if you lived in Eastern Europe during a span of many years between 1945 and 1992, you probably don't have really pleasant feelings towards the communists. Only a minority of old-timers still think with joy about their time as communists. Therefore, at least for Eastern Europe, The idea of being a communist is perceived as a blasphemy and an insult towards the suffering of the people. For the Western Europe, under the monetary dumping of the Marshall Plan, most of the countries have never experienced a socialist agenda. They were told from the beginning that their former allies during the race to Berlin, the USSR, were the bad guys who wanted to oppress them. Only two exceptions to these rules: Spain and Portugal. Their time under the regimes of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar and Francisco Franco have deeply scarred the collective mind, and this is why we were troubled by the idea of a right-wing government in Spain. In Romania, if you call yourself a communist, you will attract the sympathy of a small group of people whose lives were improved by the communist regime, such as poor farmers who were taken from their homes and moved to the big cities, who were given proper housing and a reliable workplace. But you will attract the hatred of anyone who suffered from the brutal and relentless violence of the Secret Service, Securitatea, or the Security, for example. So the point we want to make here is that the rise of the far right is not accidental. The far right parties are constantly preying upon the fears and the doubts of the common folk. The COVID pandemic hit Italy hard, and the right-wing parties advocated for an immediate closure of borders and the suspension of the Schengen freedom of movement, but changed their stance quite fast, criticizing Conte's government for its confinement measures and migration policies. The far right in Europe is gaining support by attacking European policies, their stance being anti-European. Globalization has worked to the detriment of the European population, while being encouraged by the European leaders. In a speech, Giorgia Meloni, the far-right leader of Italy, criticized Emmanuel Macron for bombing Libya, and this critique can be applied to all the nations who attacked Middle Eastern countries.
Emmanuel Macron sono quelli che hanno bombardato la Libia perché gli dava fastidio che l'Italia avesse un rapporto privilegiato in campo energetico con Gheddafi, esponendoci al caos migrazione nel quale ci troviamo.
Practically creating the refugee crisis, which has created worries and turmoil in the heart of the old continent. Is it true? We can't say for sure, but what we can say for sure is that the refugee crisis has further strengthened the anti-globalist and often xenophobic rhetoric, and it is our fault for playing right in the hands of the extremists. Their speeches often seem to reflect a harsh truth of our collective decisions. In the same speech, Meloni criticizes France for exploiting African countries by printing their money and controlling their economy, by forcing children to work in mines for the benefit of France.
Vomitevole è chi, come la Francia, continua a sfruttare l'Africa stampando moneta per 14 nazioni africane sulle quali applica il signoraggio, facendo lavorare bambini nelle miniere, estraendo materie prime come accade in Niger, dove la Francia estrae il 30% dell'uranio che gli serve a far camminare le centrali nucleari e il 90% dei nigerini vive senza elettricità.
Wait a moment, isn't this a socialist rhetoric? The condemning of neocolonialism, of wage gap between developed countries and poorer countries? Don't you, the socialists, say that we should stop exploiting the poor people in Africa or Asia for our benefit? All these questions are valid. Now, do you get our point? The far right is using valid arguments to exploit the fears and doubts of the people. We believe they are hiding behind these acute problems to gain influence and to infiltrate into the minds of the people. This is what our comrades use to counter our arguments. If they are saying exactly what the people want to hear, then they probably won't do anything out of the ordinary. They are just as populists as most of the politicians. Yet there is still the chance of history repeating itself. Hitler and Mussolini did the exact same thing. The far right has brought back the revanchism ideology, with Viktor Orban showing a map of Hungary in which Transylvania, land belonging to Romania, is displayed as part of Hungary. Of course, this is just a senseless provocation, but it truly makes you wonder if their empty threats will not one day give birth to a conflict, more alike to a civil war inside the European Union. We know the dog that barks doesn't bite, yet we have to take into account how these nations acted in relation to the war in Ukraine, for example. The European Union always appears united, except that now, more than ever, the cracks in between become more visible. Romania has its own problems with the right wing, mostly represented by more and more aggressive nationalist rhetoric. But mostly, many of us see these individuals dreaming to one day become the next Iron Guard as funny caricatures. Let's not forget that by ignoring and underestimating the threat, we give them more power. There are many more things left undiscussed. We are planning to make more in-depth videos related to the current political environment in which Europe finds itself once again. One thing is sure though, we need to band together if we want this storm of right-wing propaganda to pass. We are really curious. What you think about this topic? Is this rise of the right wing a problem, something that we should be worried about, or is it just a phase created by the current world events and it will soon come to pass? Thank you very much for your time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe, and we will gladly see you